Let me start over then, because actually, for real, because my bosses at the National Center for PTSD don't like me to talk about the animal rights stuff and like record it / pass it over the recording part, which is pretty sad, you know. But so anyway, so thank you all for coming. I'm Casey Taft, and what I'm going to be talking about today is based on a book that I wrote called Motivational Methods for Vegan Advocacy. And the idea behind it is really taking what I have kind of learned as a clinical psychologist, as somebody who works with domestically violent men who are pretty unmotivated to change their behavior, what I've learned from that, and try to apply that to animal advocacy. Because really, as a psychologist and then as an animal advocate, I see a lot of advocacy that I think kind of ignores a lot of principles of psychology that we know are helpful in terms of helping promote change in other people. And when I originally started writing this book, I wasn't really expecting it to be a real book. Really, it was just going to be a short little ebook that I was going to give away on our website. But I found myself having more and more to say and more to write, and the next thing I knew it was just long enough to be a book. And it's a small book. It's not a really long read, but hopefully it's kind of accessible and readable. So to give a little bit more background about myself, the reason I'm in Minneapolis now is that I'm training a VA hospital here in how to deliver an intervention that my colleagues and I developed to prevent domestic violence and to work with perpetrators of domestic violence. So for many years, my focus in my day job has been to develop and evaluate programs to prevent and end domestic violence. And we developed a program called the Strength at Home program that has been the only program that has ever been shown to work in a randomized controlled trial to end abuse and to prevent abuse. And this is a paper that's pretty recent. We have a bunch of papers coming out now they're all coming out showing that these programs work. So we're pretty proud of that we developed something that we think works and that there's actual evidence that it works. Also published another book recently from the American Psychological Association about trauma-informed intervention to prevent violence and work with perpetrators of violence. So this isn't all, for me to brag or anything. This is just to give you an idea of my background in that, I think a lot about how we can end and prevent needless violence, and there is a whole kind of world of psychology and behavior change that I think really applies to animal advocacy, and a lot of times I find that it just isn't really being applied. Clinical psychologists aren't really brought into kind of mainstream animal advocacy, so I felt like I had to kind of write about it and write this book. And just as a disclaimer, because I have this background doesn't mean that everything that I say is correct or that it's necessarily based on science. Because as I'll talk about, and as I talk about a lot in the book, that really there is no science in animal advocacy. There are no randomized controlled trials showing that one thing works better than anything else. There's almost no peer-reviewed published papers. So if you ever have anybody tell you that they're doing like what's effective or that what they're doing is based on science, just know that it's not true, because there really is no science here. I mean, there is this whole effective animal advocacy movement, but it's not based on peer-reviewed science as scientists know science. I kind of rant a little bit in the book about that, because I think there's a lot of a lot of pseudoscience going on. There's a lot of claims being made that just aren't really accurate. A lot of people will kind of say, well, this is based on science, just as a way to kind of shut other people up. Say, I'm right, you're wrong, this is based on science and yours isn't. But it's not. And usually what they're promoting is actually the opposite of what years and years of clinical research tells us is actually effective in order to help people change. So when I talk about my background, and as it applies to animal advocacy, a common argument I'll hear from folks, especially folks who disagree with me, is they'll say, well, working with domestic abusers has nothing to do with animal advocacy. That's a totally different thing. Like, we know so society kind of frowns upon domestic violence, but doesn't really frown upon using animals, eating animals, etc. And my response to that is, that's true, and I don't claim that these are exactly the same populations. Of course, anybody who would suggest that domestic abusers are, that working with them is exactly the same as trying to encourage somebody to go vegan, like obviously they're different. I would never argue that they're the same. However, there are basic rules of change that are pretty much invariant regardless of the population we're talking about, regardless of the problem we're trying to help people change. There are basic rules of psychology, basic rules of behavior change that pretty much apply regardless of whatever it is we're talking about, whether we're talking about helping people go vegan, helping people end their abuse, treating depression, treating PTSD, and helping people quit smoking, you name it, there are basic rules of change. And I'm going to talk about these in my talk, and I elaborate on them in the book. They're all critical, fundamental components of behavior change. First is we need to help develop clear goals with whoever it is we're working with. And I'm going to argue that we should be promoting and encouraging a vegan goal. Because you can't get a much clearer goal than ending all of our use of animals and minimizing the harm we do to animals in all ways. It's a much clearer goal than kind of a reducitarian goal of why don't we just cut down and go and do this on Mondays and that sort of thing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Relationships are important if we're trying to help other people change. So that applies to animal advocacy, it applies to pretty much everything. And actually my doctoral dissertation was on this topic in working with domestic abusers. The stronger an alliance we develop with whoever it is we're trying to help end their violence, the more likely they are to end their violence. And we showed when we developed strong relationships with domestic abusers, they ended their violence when we followed them over time at much lower rates of violence. We have to deal with motivational issues regardless of the problem. So people, as you all know, non-vegans aren't always super motivated to go vegan, right? And we have to deal with motivational issues with other human populations too. When I'm working with domestic abusers, they often blame their partner, blame the system, blame everybody else other than themselves for their abusive behavior. So that's something we have to deal with. And we have to try to consider where somebody is in terms of their readiness for change and what stage of readiness they're at. And there are models that I apply, that have been used for a long time in other areas of behavior change that should apply to vegan advocacy as well. And then when somebody actually expresses an interest in changing, we have to know how to help them make those changes. So it's not enough just to have somebody agree that they should go vegan in the case of animal advocacy, but once they make that decision, we want to be able to provide whatever tools might help them be most successful. And then the same thing in other areas of behavior change in clinical psychology. Somebody may express an interest in changing, but it's kind of one of our roles is to help them make the changes that they want to make. So are we all in agreement that these are kind of basic rules and they all kind of should apply to vegan advocacy? Because it seems obvious, but these things are not always what happens in animal advocacy. And I'm going to have some examples to illustrate that. So this is a question I'm sure we've all thought about a lot. How do we help others go vegan? And that is a question I think about a lot as well. And one might ask, why are we thinking about this question, about helping others go vegan rather than helping people cut down on using animals? Again, this is kind of a big movement in the animal advocacy world, this reducitarian movement where folks are kind of giving up on asking people to go vegan and just asking people to cut down. And there are some basic reasons, based on behavior change principles that I think we should be working towards a vegan goal and promoting a vegan goal. First is the obvious. We should be promoting veganism because it's an issue of justice, and we should not be promoting or encouraging or in any way kind of enabling the idea that it's okay to do harm to others in moderation, right? So to suggest that it's okay, to encourage people to just cut down on using animals, basically you're suggesting that it's okay to be killing animals in moderation. We would not say the same thing for any other group. We would not say, in my domestic violence work, I would never suggest to a domestic abuser, why don't you just cut down on your abusive behavior? Why don't you just, not be abusive towards your partner on Mondays? Or why don't you just engage in psychological abuse and forget about physical abuse? And it seems kind of silly to be making these comparisons, but if we're really going to treat our animal use as an issue of social justice, we have to really kind of put ourselves in their place. And I think it's often very helpful to kind of think of humans, think about whether we would say the same thing for humans that we're saying for non-humans. So we would never suggest it's okay to just cut down on using other humans or doing harm to humans. Also, veganism is important because it covers all forms of animal exploitation. So if we're just asking people to cut down on eating animals, we're not focusing on all of the ways that we use animals, all the other kinds of forms of harm that we inflict on animals in terms of clothes and entertainment and just everywhere you look, folks are exploiting animals in different ways. So if we're only focusing on what we eat, and of course what we eat is a big part of veganism, and it's a big part of the harm we do to non-human animals, but it doesn't cover really the whole ethic of minimizing the harm we're doing to non-human animals. So it's a much clearer goal, and that's kind of the next point. It provides a much clearer end goal where folks know exactly kind of what we're shooting for. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how having that clear end goal is such a fundamental part of promoting change in other people. The clearer that goal is, the more specific it is, the more change we're going to see. And lastly, which I already mentioned, there's no evidence that promoting anything less than veganism is more effective than promoting veganism. Some will argue, well, I just want to be effective, or they talk about harm reduction and suggest that promoting less than veganism might reduce more harm than promoting veganism, but there's no actual evidence of that. And I would argue, for all the reasons I'm going to be talking about, promoting veganism is more likely to reduce harm and help other people go vegan than promoting something less than veganism. You're free to disagree with this, and we can debate this afterwards. Because I know this is something where a lot of people have strong beliefs about it. I'm happy to talk to folks about it. So before I get into kind of some of the basic principles of psychology and how it applies to animal advocacy, I think it's also helpful for us to think about why do others remain non-vegan, right? And I think this is an important question for us to think about because it helps us to reach non-vegans. It helps us to understand what gets in the way for them. It helps us to have more empathy for other folks and to kind of reach them and help them overcome barriers that they may be experiencing. How many of you have friends or family members who remain non-vegan in spite of all the information that you give them? It's incredibly frustrating. Pretty much everybody. So this is kind of a question that we all ask ourselves. With all the information that's out there, with all that we know about the harm that we do, it's not like, very few people can kind of make it through the world without having any idea of the harm we're doing to non-human animals anymore. But there are reasons why people remain non-vegan. It's helpful for us to think about that. And I think probably one of the biggest reasons is that it's really difficult for folks to come to grips with the fact that they are directly harming animals. Everybody likes to think of themselves as an animal lover. At least most people like to think of themselves that way. They don't like it, unless they have psychopathic tendencies, right? So most people, it's really hard for them to kind of come to grips with the fact that they are doing this harm to non-human animals, and we as vegans are living reminders to them of the harm that they're doing. So we get a lot of this kind of shame response in non-vegans when all we have to do is tell the non-vegan, in some cases, that we're vegan, and then what kind of responses do you get when, sometimes when you just tell somebody you're vegan? Defensive? Bacon though? Okay, what kind of, let's see, what are some defensive responses they say?
Something that I think is really encouraging though, is that in the 70s when I first started to be vegetarian as a kid, I only ever got the responses of bacon,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. Now, a tremendous percentage of the time, I get the response, oh, I only eat a little bit of meat.
Right.
Or I only eat chicken.
Yes,
Or,
right.
you know.
I only eat humane.
Yeah. Right, the humane stuff that they serve at McDonald's.
I think that's a good point. So maybe there is this shift in public consciousness where folks are more conscious of it, but they still have this kind of defensive, shame response, right? So that's one of the factors that I think kind of keeps people stuck. So when people have this shame response, what often happens is they shut down and they shut out other people. So that's one of the reasons why I'm going to talk a little bit about why being super aggressive in our advocacy isn't a good strategy if it is more likely to elicit that shame response and have people kind of close themselves off to you and what you have to say. Also, veganism myths and socialization. So what are some myths about veganism?
You won't get enough protein.
You won't get enough protein, right?
It's a cult.
It's a cult, right? What else?
All vegans are thin.
All vegans are thin, okay. The whole world can't go vegan.
Well,
Right.
It's way too expensive.
Way too expensive, right? So there's all kinds of myths out there, and we kind of joke about it and laugh about it because we've researched it. We know the truth, behind these myths. But a lot of people really believe these things, and these are barriers to people changing. People really do think they can't be healthy, on a vegan diet or all these things that seem absurd to us. But these are reasons that keep people stuck in non-veganism. And then personal and financial challenges, which I think is important, and I think that a lot of animal advocates kind of gloss this over or forget about what their change process was like. I think it's really harmful then when we just throw out to people that veganism is easy. Kind of get over it and go vegan, because it's not necessarily easy for everyone. For a lot of us, it took us a long time to go vegan. I know it did for me, and looking back, I think, well, it should have been easy, but it wasn't necessarily easy, for me at the time. And there's all kinds of reasons why it can be difficult. A lot of folks out there are really just kind of struggling in their day-to-day lives. They're struggling with financial issues, mental health issues, all kinds of stuff. Things are bad. Things are bad out there. A lot of people are having a tough time. So we have to, keep in mind that for some folks, making any kind of change in their life feels like a struggle, and for some folks, going vegan feels like a bridge too far because they have way too much and they're barely kind of keeping afloat as it is. So I think we should keep this in mind and be careful not to just throw out that kind of stuff. Vegan is easy, that kind of thing, because it doesn't really it brings about that shame response, and it doesn't really promote change. It doesn't really help anybody change when we say that. And I think I have an example here. Well, no, I have an example in a little while about how to respond to folks who kind of bring up some of these things. So let's talk about long-term goals. This is really critical. It's been shown to be really critical in the motivation field. And there's entire theoretical models, a ton of research that have looked at goal setting and how important that is. And what this literature shows is that goals need not be easy in the short term. I think what happens for a lot of folks is that we want to see people change. We want to help animals, right? And we want to bring about an immediate change in the other person. So what happens sometimes is people, because we're so desperate to see that immediate change, we'll say, okay, you don't want to go vegan, well, how about you just kind of cut down on eating animals? Because you try to give them this easy short-term goal, but in the long run, what the evidence suggests is doing that is harmful to helping somebody achieve the longer-term goal and achieving greater behavior change. There's a lot of research showing that the more specific and clear and actually difficult that long-term goal is, the more change the person's going to make on their way to that goal. Because they are going to work on developing that long-term goal. And of course, they're not going to necessarily set that goal right at the beginning, but you'll work with them, talk to them about working towards that goal. But if they do set that long-term difficult goal, they're able to monitor their own progress on the way to that goal. Just saying, do your best doesn't give anybody anything to aspire to. And what you're going to find is they'll, like change a little here, reduce a little there, go back to eating more. They'll treat it, kind of like a diet that they go back and forth on, like any other kind of diet. We're not going to trick other people into going vegan. I think that's an important point. A lot of folks out there, and a lot of animal advocates, actually mainstream animal advocates, try to use these sort of social psychology techniques where they think they're going to fool people into going vegan, like they're selling a car, like they're going to use their master, salesmanship techniques and get people to go vegan. But that's not really the way long-term internal change works. We're not going to be successful in helping people go vegan the same way that we would, sell a car. Because we want people to make that internal change. So, there's this idea, kind of like the foot in the door technique, which is talked about a lot, among some animal advocates, that, I'm just going to ask them to set this short-term goal. Then once they achieve that short-term goal, I'm going to ask them to set up another short-term goal, and another one, and another one. And then maybe somebody else will talk to them about another short-term goal. Then maybe they'll change a little bit more, and like, poof, in the end they're vegan, right? And, that may happen. For a lot of us, we went on these long journeys to veganism, but that's not something I would recommend. I went on a long journey to veganism, but I probably would have gone vegan a lot sooner if somebody talked to me about setting a vegan goal in the first place. So that's not really, how we as psychologists, how behavior change, experts help people make long-lasting, long-term changes. We don't try to trick them, by setting up all these like intermediate goals, like along the way. We try to help them figure out, what is it that you want to achieve? How can we help you to become nonviolent? When I'm working with a domestic violence perpetrator, at the outset we talk about how to help them remain nonviolent. Speaking of which, this is my grad school advisor, Chris Murphy, who is in town doing training with me. I almost didn't know he was going to come. So now, Chris is recently gone vegan himself. Yeah. So Chris was my mentor in the domestic violence realm. I went to grad school under him at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. So anyway, thanks for coming.
Sorry.
No problem. Well, one thing that I think is important is that also that we shouldn't put too much emphasis on any one single interaction that we're having with folks. How many of you have kind of battled it out with somebody, a friend or family member or somebody online, trying to convince them of going vegan or trying to convince them of some aspect of veganism? How many of you have kind of wasted a lot of time doing it? I know I have, battling it out over whether, cavemen, ate a lot of meat, or whether we're biologically adapted to eat animals, all these kinds of things. Or just placing too much pressure on ourselves to really see a big change. And, we as psychologists know that our patients don't have epiphanies every session, right? That every interaction you have with somebody isn't necessarily going to lead to a big change, but we may be planting seeds, we may be helping them move along in terms of their readiness to change. Even if they haven't established that vegan goal, we may have helped move them towards that goal. And I'll argue that helping any kind of movement towards that goal is much more important than trying to set short-term goals that don't ultimately lead to veganism. And so don't be too hard on yourselves, basically is what I want. Because we all want to help animals so much. And we put so much pressure on ourselves that sometimes what happens is you get kind of animal advocates who kind of feel burned out because they put so much into it and they feel disappointed that they're not seeing immediate change. But I can tell you that you are helping people change. You may not necessarily see it, they may not tell you, but you are planting seeds and you are helping people move along in terms of their readiness for change. And down the road, they may very well go vegan. I run our social media page for vegan publishers, and I have people message me almost every day saying that they've gone vegan because of what they saw. Somebody post online or somebody shared, a post or an article here or there, and that had a big impact on them. They don't necessarily go back and tell that person that they influenced them. So you are all having a much larger influence than you probably even realize. So I want to talk a little bit about relationships in vegan advocacy. And Chris knows this, and again, I mentioned this was the topic of my doctoral dissertation, where we showed the stronger the relationship we develop with, in this case, domestic abusers, the more that they reduced and ended their violence. And this isn't only true in terms of ending needless violence, but it's true in pretty much every area of psychology, every area of behavior change. It's only kind of logical that the more we connect with somebody, the more that the other person likes us, the more they are going to join with us in working towards whatever goal we're trying to help them achieve. This seems obvious, but how many of you have seen examples of folks who kind of forget about the importance of this relationship or see overly aggressive kind of advocacy online? I've definitely seen that. And then sometimes there's also this kind of there's this notion that just because we're promoting veganism, that we're necessarily being overly aggressive, or that we're being pushy, or that we're kind of coming across as all or nothing and really hostile. But that need not be the case at all. We can promote veganism in a kind and compassionate way, in a matter-of-fact way, and assertively, where we're not putting down other people. I think sometimes people, especially the folks in the reducitarian camp, will argue that they'll frame things kind of in black and white terms, like either you can be an aggressive, like vegan, where you're only asking people to go vegan, or you can be like the kind reducitarian, where you're just asking people to do the best that you can, right? But that's really kind of a false dichotomy. We can be kind and compassionate, help people change while remaining, while advocating for animals in the way that they deserve to be advocated for. So we can show understanding and empathy while maintaining that clear anti-violence stance, be respectful and support positive changes, have a listening mindset, and avoid a focus on winning. So this is something that that we as psychologists know, that battling it out with somebody who you're trying to help them change their behavior is not necessarily going to help them change. It's not going to move them any closer to that goal. So we as vegans, can get into these battles about again, like cavemen, or about protein or health or anything else, and we will probably win these arguments, because really, the evidence, science, and ethics is on the side of veganism. There's really no good logical or scientific or moral argument for needlessly killing animals, right? So we're probably going to win those arguments, but we have to ask ourselves, am I helping this person move any closer to veganism by winning, by like battling it out, by arguing with this other person? Okay, so here is kind of a scenario, and I have these throughout the book, and these are real interactions I have with folks, either online or private emails, or what have you. So Jane says, I'm a long-time vegetarian and I want to be vegan. The problem is that I feel lonely and depressed a lot, and the only time I really get out is when I go to my local diner. They make me a vegetarian dish, but they can't do vegan. My response to her was, that's awesome that you want to go vegan. When you're doing what you can to reduce animal cruelty, you may notice changes in how you feel overall. That may mean finding a new place to eat or eating at home. Please keep in mind that your inconvenience pales in comparison to what these killed animals go through. Her response is, trust me, I know this. I beat myself up all the time about the fact that I haven't gone vegan yet. The thing is, I don't have any other good way of being around good people and getting support, so I think that means I can't go vegan. My response was, that's hard when you feel like there's no good way to get the social contact you need while going vegan. It's scary to change routines, but you may find that you actually feel better if you did, especially since you're not happy now. And her response is, you're probably right that I'll feel better if I rip off that Band-Aid and just do it. I've seen a lot of other vegans post online about how they feel a lot happier and healthier after going vegan. So I'm going to put this all to you. What do you think about how I responded to Jane? So she said, if she's vegetarian, she does want to be vegan, but at the same time she feels depressed a lot, and she's kind of afraid because the diner she goes to tell her that they can't do a vegan meal, so she's worried that she's not going to get that support she needs to deal with her depression. Yes?
My inclination here would have been, and I've actually, I think had pretty similar conversations, is to say, hey, I know that not everybody is lucky as I am to live in the Twin Cities where there's a pretty big network of vegans. But here are these online things where you can get to know people in other places, and maybe that's a place where you can look for support. Is there a reason why you were more reflecting her feelings back to her as opposed to problem solving like I would?
Yes, there is, because what I wanted to do at first is kind of validate how she feels and show kind of support and empathy for her situation while maintaining that vegan stance. And then the discussions that happened after this were more about that. Were more about, how can we, because at the end of this interaction, she has really moved in terms of her readiness, where at the end she's saying, you're probably right, I will feel better if I rip off that Band-Aid. So she is kind of closer to kind of moving from kind of, I'm going to talk about this in a little while, moving from kind of the kind of ambivalent stage to kind of saying, you're right, like I need to do this, and how can we get there? And that's when, a lot of other folks chimed in and talked to her about, well, what about, friends or where you can kind of cook meals together with, or local meetups, or other ways, online that you can get support. So that was a discussion that happened, and I do think that's important to talk about too. Any other thoughts about this interaction or my response to her? Is this the kind of, what kind of response might you see online to something like that? So you have somebody saying, I want to go vegan, but my diner won't make me vegan meals. My favorite diner won't make me vegan meals. Would you often see as a response to that?
I think you might often just get the last sentence of your first response.
Yes.
But not in such a nice way.
Right, yeah, right. Because you're right, in that sentence, please keep in mind your inconvenience pales in comparison to what these killed animals go through. I am kind of testing the waters a little bit. There was a risk that she could have, when I said that, she could have had a really defensive, hostile response to that. She took it well, and I think it worked in this case. But you're right. The response we often will get that people will be like, give me a break. Like, that you can't eat at another diner, so you think it's worth, continuing to contribute to the murder and, rape or what have you of animals. Like, those are the kind of responses we get. And, and actually that, she did get some of those kind of responses. And I was kind of like, delete, because I knew that wasn't going to be helpful. That was going to get in the way of kind of talking to her and kind of showing empathy and listening to what she had to say.
The other thing that I would think is that whole, okay, you can't go vegan at that diner, but can you be vegan all the rest of the time? Yeah.
Yeah, well, see, I wouldn't say that, because that's kind of going against you're trying to say, because suggesting that then you're kind of suggesting that that's an okay thing to do, and it's okay if she doesn't decide to go vegan right then, and I don't expect she will. Like, whenever I talk to somebody about veganism, I don't expect they're going to necessarily agree with me right then and there, but my hope is that they're moving along in terms of their thinking about it. Because what I don't want is, I don't want them to say, okay, you're right, I will be vegan everywhere else except for this diner, and then continue to think that that's kind of okay, right? And they get comfortable with that. The same way people get comfortable like consuming humane meat, or being vegetarian, like the more, because people like live their whole lives that way and are convinced that that's okay, and that's the compromise that they're making, for themselves or for their families.
I just want to say, I like how you bring up that she's not happy in the moment, which is something that I never thought of doing. And I like the way you put it too. Like, well, clearly something's not working, so this could be an alternative.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think sometimes what happens is people are just, especially when people are depressed, and this is a really tough issue, where they feel like if they make any kind of change, they risk things going really bad. And that is a possibility. So it's a really sensitive area. But often what we see is that when folks actually start to make that change, when they actually try something different, then they do feel better. And veganism, especially when folks they feel like they're doing something positive for others, when they feel like they're helping others in some way, human or non-human, they feel better about themselves. And that's actually a pretty good treatment for depression, is to try to help other people. So when people are living in a way that's consistent with their values, they may find that they actually feel better than they thought they would. But there's no guarantee of that. And so it is something we have to be really sensitive to. Okay, so I want to talk about assertiveness a little bit. And really, if there was one skill I could bestow upon every animal advocate in the world, it would be assertiveness. Because often what I see, and this is not just a problem in animal advocacy, it's a problem out there in the world in general, is people go from extremes between being overly passive and overly aggressive in their communication. And often they do both. So what we really want to strive for is being assertive. And being assertive means that we're listening to other people, but we're also clearly advocating for animals, in an unapologetic way. We're doing it in a way where we're not disrespecting the other person, but we're not disrespecting the non-human animals by kind of, remaining silent, right? So being assertive is a way of letting other people know how you feel, in this case, advocating for non-human animals in a way where you're not disrespecting the other person, or you're not kind of being overly passive and keeping silent. Passive advocacy tends to lead to less change. So, if all we do is, are just remain vegan in our own lives, but don't ever talk to anybody else about it, or don't ever advocate for animals in any way, we're probably going to produce less change or help other people go vegan less than if we actually speak out for animals in all the various ways that we can do that. And there's all different ways that we can do that, and I know not everybody feels like they're able to kind of go out and do a protest or that sort of thing, and some other folks do. And not everybody is able to get out and do that sort of thing. So it's different for everybody, but generally speaking, the more that we speak out for animals, the more that we're able to kind of promote veganism, the more we're able to help animals. On the other extreme, aggressive advocacy puts others on the defensive. So I mentioned a little bit about shame and how non-vegans may have a shame response when confronted with veganism. The more aggressive we are, the more we kind of engage in name calling and kind of shaming behavior, the more likely that the other person is just kind of shut down and stop listening to us altogether. Or they'll just tell themselves, well, here's another angry vegan, and another kind of irrational vegan. I'm not going to listen to anything that they have to say. Which leads me to my next point, this angry vegan stereotype, which really is a stereotype. Vegans on the whole are kind and compassionate people. Really, the kindest people that I know are vegans. And this stereotype of vegans as being angry is put out there, just like other stereotypes for other social justice movements, the angry feminist or the angry black man, which are put out there to really silence us and to kind of get people to stop speaking out, against oppression. So I think we have to be aware of that and try not to internalize this stereotype, and don't be so afraid of being thought of as an angry vegan, because that's really what other people would love you to do. Non-vegans would love us all to just shut up about animals, right? And then they can continue to do what they do and not be reminded of anything. So we should not oblige them and silence ourselves for fear of falling into this kind of false stereotype. That said, we have every reason to be angry, right? I mean, it's okay to be angry because there's a lot to be angry about. We're killing, we're needlessly killing over 1 trillion animals a year, so it's okay to be angry. It's just how we express that anger really makes a difference. If we express that anger in an aggressive, attacking way, we're not going to be as effective. So I think I have some examples here. So Nancy says, I have a lot of respect for vegans. Good for you for showing such self-restraint. I can never do it, though. I love cheese too much. How many of you have heard that? You don't have to raise your hands, because I know you've all heard that before.
So cheese central around here.
Right. Oh, right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So passive response to that. Well, veganism isn't for everyone. Maybe you could just cut down on meat then? So why is this passive?
Because it's saying they can still have cheese, but just not having meat.
They're not saying they can still meat, they're just talking about cutting down.
Right, just kind of, yeah, I mean, it's passive because we're not advocating for animals. The aggressive response. Did you know that mother cows are raped and baby cows are murdered for your precious cheese? You're beyond self. I don't think I need to ask, why that's aggressive. And the assertive response. Of course you could do it. After you've been vegan for a month or so, you won't even miss animal foods. It doesn't take restraint for us to act in a way that's consistent with our values. And I don't expect everybody's going to say this exactly, and folks may disagree, with this assertive saying it this way. But the general idea is that you're being encouraging, you're being positive, you're clearly advocating for animals while you're not putting the other person down or engaging in name calling. This is the kind of message that is likely to be received by the other person. So this is something that we do as psychologists when we're teaching couples therapy, how to give a message that's most likely to be received by the other person in a positive way and have them kind of reciprocate in communicating. So being assertive is by far the most effective way of communication in general, regardless of this situation. So let's talk about enhancing motivation for change. Chris is actually an expert on this. In the training that we're doing this week, he's training psychologists to work with domestic abusers in a motivational way to get them to move along in terms of their readiness for change. So there are models of behavior change that are pretty well established in fields of behavior change. How many of you have heard of the trans-theoretical model of change, or the stages of change model, or motivational interviewing? Okay, we have 1, 2, 3. Okay, so not many. Which I think is really too bad. Because as animal advocates, wanting to help people move along in terms of their readiness for change, this really applies. This really fits really well. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about it. This model has been shown to fit. Originally it was applied to substance abusers, and then it's been applied to every other area of behavior change you could possibly think of. So the idea is that our ability to influence others is not determined about how they immediately respond. Our interaction may help them think more about the ethical implications of their animal use, setting the stage for later change. And our discussion may help tip the balance in favor of changing. And this is the actual stages of change model. Can folks see this in the back? So there's different stages in terms of people's readiness for change. And the idea behind this model is that people often go through different phases in terms of their readiness or their motivation for changing a particular behavior. And how we help that person change may vary depending on what specific stage they're in terms of their readiness. So the first stage here is pre-contemplation. So in the pre-contemplation stage, the person isn't really thinking about changing at all. It's not really on their radar. So applied to animal advocacy, these are probably the bacon trolls on your Facebook pages, right? These are the folks who are kind of their response to everything is bacon, or lions eat meat, so I should eat meat too, kind of thing. These are people who just kind of throw out these kind of thoughtless justifications without really thinking about it. They don't have the intentions here. So for these folks, consciousness raising to help kind of counter some of these myths that non-vegans may sometimes have can be especially helpful, debunking these myths related to veganism. Here we want to avoid arguments, again, because it's not going to help the situation, battling it out, like we've been talking about. Just providing really basic information can be especially helpful. Then you have the contemplation phase. And here the person is actually thinking about changing. So they may display kind of both sides of their ambivalence. On the one hand, I am interested in veganism. On the other hand, I love cheese too much, right? So there's some thought about making that change. So here we want to try to tip the balance in favor of changing. And here is when our discussion of ethics is particularly important. And really, the ethical argument of veganism is our most effective argument that we have. There's no more effective argument than saying we have no need to be doing any of this. We have no need to be using animals. We have no need to be eating animals. There's no argument against that. It's all completely unnecessary. So this is especially important during this pre-contemplation phase. And just asking the simple question, are you interested in going vegan, can make a huge difference. And I ask this all the time, online when I have any kind of inkling at all that the person may be interested in veganism, even if they don't necessarily express it, but even if they have this strong shame response, even if they're really defensive, it suggests to me that it's probably because they are actually struggling with this, and they're actually thinking about this, and they may actually be interested in it. So you would be surprised at how often when you ask this question, are you interested in going vegan, the other person will say yes. And that in and of itself is huge, to have somebody acknowledge that yes, they are interested in going vegan. One of the kind of ideas behind this stage of change model and motivational interviewing is what folks say, what they verbalize, what they write is actual behavior. So the more that you can facilitate these kind of change statements, the more that you are literally moving them towards that goal that you want to move them towards. So just saying, yes, I am interested in veganism is a huge step in the right direction towards changing their behavior. Or maybe the person, when you ask that question, will say, I am interested in going vegan, but, and then they'll talk about the reasons why they haven't. And that's also really helpful information to have too, because then you can talk to them about those barriers and how you can help overcome some of those barriers. So this is something I ask almost every day to folks, are you interested in going vegan? And it usually leads to productive discussions. So don't be afraid to ask anyone that question. Then there's the preparation phase. And here the person has made the decision to go vegan in this case. And for these folks, it could be helpful to help them with whatever tips or tools will help them get there. So when somebody has made the decision to go vegan, here is where I think the shopping tips, the nutritional information can really come in handy. And then the next two stages are action and maintenance. So the person has made the change, and we want them to maintain the change. And for these folks, providing a supportive network for them can be especially helpful. Groups such as this, meetings such as this, or your online spaces where folks can talk about animal advocacy or whatever it is, or food or whatever, can be really helpful to kind of keep people kind of hooked in to the community, to help them maintain veganism and remain vegan. So based on this model, our ways of advocating for animals may vary depending on where somebody is in terms of their readiness. So oftentimes, we'll hear folks say, well, that's not how you do it. That's not how you help animals. You have to, promote, show them that vegan food tastes great. As if that one thing is going to turn everybody vegan. And we all know that if there was one thing we could say to everybody that would make everybody go vegan, we'd all be saying it, and we'd be living in a vegan world right now. But there isn't one message that works for everybody. And really, vegan advocacy is more of an art where we have to try to recognize where somebody is in terms of their readiness and what message might help them move along to the next phase in terms of their readiness for change. Any thoughts about this? Great.
Just in terms of when people are contemplating, it's really important to find out why and what their motivations are, because people may have obviously different reasons or additional reasons that you want to really focus on.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so just some other considerations. It can be helpful to diagnose the stage of change where the person is, trying to figure out where they are in terms of their readiness, so you can kind of figure out what's the best way to respond to them, match your approach with their current stage. Again, I think I mentioned this, different people require different messages. Remember, we can't make other people change. I mean, this is something that's unfortunate. We can't force other people to go vegan. And there will be times where we have to kind of call it a day and pack it in, where we have to tell ourselves, I've done everything that I could, I've said everything that I could, and I can't make this person, change. I can't, and there's, it's not, I've done the best that I can here. And then sometimes we have to find a more receptive audience. I know a lot of folks will describe this with family members, where we try again and again to convince our family members to go vegan. And it's really hard for us, to see people that we love and care about who we know are otherwise good people who still contribute to the harm of non-human animals. It's really tough for us. But at some point, we have to kind of decide, whether we have to decide that it's just not doing any good to continue to try to force them to change if they're not willing to do it. And at some level, we have to decide, am I willing to kind of accept this person or not? And that's an individual decision for us all to make. One thing that I like to think of non-vegans as pre-vegans. This kind of goes along, the idea of readiness for change. I think everybody has the ability to go vegan, and I think it's a more kind of hopeful way of thinking of others, and it also kind of reminds us that we weren't always vegan ourselves. Most of us were pre-vegans at some point, and it helps me have more empathy for other people when I tell myself that it'll happen. It's just not time yet for that, right? I find this to be more helpful than to kind of use other kind of terms to describe non-vegans like carnists or whatever, which kind of is usually used in a derogatory way and kind of splits people into groups and is used as kind of a slur a lot of the time. Okay, so here's another example. Susan says, I'm not vegan, but I've read books and watched videos about how these animals are tortured. It stresses them out, but there are organic options that I do agree with. As much as I would love to quit eating meat, it's a difficult habit to give up. My response was, it sounds like you agree with veganism, so how can we help you go vegan? If you've read up on it, I'm sure you know that organic meat is also cruel to animals. And she said, true, I just need to find a good place to start. And I said, we can definitely help with that. What information would be most helpful for you to go vegan? So what stage is Susan in when she made her first statement here? Contemplation, right. So she's describing her ambivalence, where she's not vegan, but she does realize that what we do to animals is wrong, at some level. But on the other hand, there are organic options she does agree with. Those two statements don't really fit together. That's often what you get when you find somebody in the contemplation stage where they're kind of making inconsistent statements that don't really make a lot of sense. But yeah, so she's in contemplation. What about at her second statement? True, I just need to find a good place to start. This is a test. I'm seeing if you remember the different stages. What stage is she in there?
Preparation.
Good, yeah, preparation. So she's actually, she's actually kind of gone from the contemplation, from her first statement to the second statement. She's actually saying, you're right, I just need to find a place to start. So this is really positive movement. This is kind of a victory in and of itself. So if this was the end of our conversation, I would feel really good about this, that she's kind of taken a step towards veganism. And I should also say, there are probably several other scenarios that I could post here that have gone wrong. So of course, I only put the examples that worked well in the book. So it's not like, and the reason I say that is because we as animal advocates can only do so much, and we can say something perfectly. The same thing as psychologists. We can say the perfect thing, have the perfect response to somebody, but we have no control over what they do with that, right? So it goes along the idea of we can't make people change. So I just want to talk about a few advocacy communication traps that we can sometimes fall into. Focusing on the negative. I think this is a trap that a lot of us can fall into. What I really try to do is find a little bit of positivity in what the other person is saying. To find that little grain of motivation that they might have, and I will try to expand on it. And I will kind of reinforce it and reflect it back, 10 times over, and hope that they come along with me and agree with my reflection. What I try not to do when somebody describes ambivalence, when they describe reason, in the last example, that there are organic options that I agree with, but I don't agree with the cruelty done to animals. I focus much more on the fact that they are interested in minimizing the harm they're doing to animals, rather than going on at length about the organic meat thing. Because it's another basic rule of psychology. The more we reinforce positive behavior, we see more change than really just trying to punish the negative statements people are making. Also, we should avoid mind reading, where we kind of assume we know what other people are thinking or feeling. And this is just a good rule to follow in general when we're communicating with other people. But what I'm thinking about here when I say this is I try to give others the benefit of the doubt. And I assume that they're interested in learning more. I assume that they may be interested in veganism at some level, rather than assuming that they're just trying to troll me or piss me off, right? Because this is something I see a lot too, where I'll see people go online and they'll ask legitimate questions that may come across as naive or almost silly to us, but they're dead serious. But then you have other people jump in and say, and like get really hostile, get really aggressive with them, because they don't really, they're assuming the worst in other people. And I think this is a problem that we as animal advocates experience a lot. When we get to that negative place where we just start to think that everybody is terrible, and we just start assuming the worst in other people. And I'm going to talk about that in a little while when I talk about trauma. And I think this is really important because it's really easy to go down that road towards just kind of, just thinking that the world is a terrible place and everybody's a terrible person. The more that we have an open mind and assume the best in other people, and that we avoid the mind reading, the less likely we're going to misread a situation, and the less likely we are to kind of sabotage a situation that we may have been able to help somebody change. Sarah, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. I have a recent example where I was on a news thread and somehow the topic of animals was there, so I went on to drop a link to a vegan site, and there was a woman there who was saying, well, why are you concerned about this if in your vegan diet there are field mice that are going to get killed? So it's like one of those common responses, but I assumed that like maybe she's serious. And so I said like, that's a valid point. That is sad if those field mice get killed. And then I just went into additional details like, I'm glad you care about those mice. And now she's vegan.
Wow.
And she's an activist.
Wow.
So that well, yeah, just to
awesome.
show that like, it's true, because oftentimes they are giving you those common but responses,
Right.
but sometimes they're genuinely curious.
Yeah. And it's not easy, we hear it all the time, and we have to give the same answer again and again and again. It's not easy to do it, and we see so many people who use those kinds of, make those arguments, and they really are trolling us.
Yes.
They really are trying to upset us. But we should not assume that that's the case, right? So it's hard. This isn't easy to do. It's hard to give people the benefit of the doubt, but we will find cases exactly like that where you will help somebody really make a big change because you gave them the benefit of the doubt. Yes?
I'm still thinking about the end of the previous slide where you were saying, what information can we give you? And I guess my reaction to that might be, from their side might be, I don't know what information you can give me. Is there anything wrong with saying, well, I'm wondering what you might see as the obstacles? Is it, it's like suggesting a couple of things that people sometimes see as obstacles.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
That's not like going in too negative a direction.
No,
I don't want to put too much of the onus on them.
Yeah, no, that's a question I ask all the time. What gets in the way for you? If somebody says, yes, I am interested in veganism, and that is a follow-up question. I'll say, okay, well, that's great. So what gets in the way for you? How can I help? Because those barriers are maybe what's keeping them from going vegan. So it's really important to talk about. And again, try to avoid allowing discussion to get sidetracked. And I think I have an example in the next slide. So Joseph says, meat is food for humans and has been since the beginning of time. We're designed to eat meat. That's why we have these canines. You won't go to the jungle and lecture to a cheetah not to eat those antelopes anymore, would you? How many of you have heard something like this? Chris, you don't go on enough vegan pages. So my response to this is, unlike cheetahs, humans have no biological need to eat other animals. It's not even healthy for us. Since it's unnecessary, it's not ethical. What matters is whether it's defensible to eat animals right now, in the current time, given the immense suffering it causes to animals and the destruction it does to the planet. So what I think is, again, our best argument is that we have no need to be doing this, and to try to bring it back to that as much as we can. We can argue about canine teeth all day, right? We can argue about cavemen, we can argue about diet, but it's probably not going to be a productive discussion that's going to help anybody change, right?
I would have trouble getting past since the beginning of time. Some of that stuff there, just thrown in on that.
Right.
I get lost that I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, there's a lot factually wrong with what you're saying too, right? I mean, because the truth is, in the earliest humans really hardly ate any animals at all. They scavenged a little bit, but they weren't hunters at all. Like, no, they consumed very little animals. So a lot of this stuff is just false, you know. But it's not really productive to get into this battle over canines, you know, and all that kind of stuff. It just sidetracks you from really the central point, which is we have no need to be doing any of this. It can't be ethical to needlessly harm and kill animals. It's tempting. I know it's tempting. Okay, so lastly, I want to talk a little bit about trauma and animal advocacy. This is something that I don't think really gets discussed enough. Many of us became animal advocates perhaps because of our own experience of exposure to trauma, whether we experienced it ourselves or witnessed other people abusing others. So we may be especially sensitive to abuse towards others and abuse towards, you know, the most defenseless among us, such as non-human animals. So many of us have our own, you know, trauma histories that we're struggling with. And then we, as advocates, we bear witness to other atrocities, you know, on a daily basis for a lot of us. And when you're really aware of the harm we do to non-human animals, you see it everywhere. You can't turn on the TV, walk down the street, read a book without some kind of reminder of the harm we do to non-human animals. So it's something that we experience, that we're faced with on a nonstop basis. So this is where I think we need to be careful about going down that road to where we just think everybody sucks, right? Or you have that such a negative outlook that we think everybody is just terrible. Because the more we start to think that way, the less effective we're going to be as animal advocates. And I know a lot of animal advocates who are this way, and I can tell you they're the least effective animal advocates I know. You know, those folks who just kind of, you know, like berate non-vegans on you know, various pages, or kind of call them murderers, rapists, all that kind of stuff, and they just kind of they have a hard time recognizing where somebody is in terms of their readiness and helping to kind of promote change and get them to that next level. Because when you're in that kind of really negative, dark place, it's hard to find that little bit of positivity that you want to help expand on and reinforce. So that's where self-care comes in. Obviously, we all need to take care of ourselves. We need to know what our limits are in terms of how much we can expose ourselves to. So for some of us, that might mean kind of, you know, shutting the computer. You know, maybe you've had enough for the day, or maybe some people have to stop following certain pages, whatever it is, you know, or even, you know, in terms of our relationships with other people, we may need to decide, you know, this relationship isn't healthy for me. You know, if you have other friends or family members who are sort of bullying you, you know, for being vegan, whatever it is, like, we have to be aware of what our limits are, what is healthy for us, and take steps to kind of ensure we're taking good care of ourselves and that we're, you know, we're able to be happy and, you know, healthy vegan advocates. It's helpful to have a supportive network. It's helpful to have safe spaces where we're able to talk to like-minded people or communicate with like-minded people, you know, about advocacy or whatever else it is. So that's really important. You know, since I, you know, wrote this book and giving talks, I have a lot of advocates who tell me that they have PTSD from bearing witness to the harm that we do to non-human animals. And it's disappointing that often they will describe talking to therapists or other providers who don't show any kind of understanding, empathy, or compassion, and they just kind of take it as, the actual therapists take it as a way to suggest that their veganism is the problem, or that they're somehow abnormal. So if any of you have a provider who says anything like that or does anything like that, just know that you should change providers right away. That the trauma we're exposed to is very real. And you know, trauma reactions and PTSD that folks may experience is real as well. So if anybody tries to tell you that it's not, then you should stop listening to them. Just in closing, you know, one of the reasons why I wrote this book is because I really believe that our success will be determined at the grassroots level, which means, you know, all of us going out into the world, educating other people, trying to help other people change is really what's going to make this movement a success or not. You know, I don't think the large animal groups are going to bring about the changes that we need in a lot of ways. I think they're kind of counterproductive to vegan advocacy. And you know, no alien from outer space is going to come down and, you know, make us all go vegan. It's really up to all of us. So that's why you know, how we communicate with other people, how we engage in advocacy really makes a big difference. You know, there's been such a huge infusion of energy into this movement. I just want to see it kind of directed in the right way. And yeah, I could say a lot more about that. So anyway, I hope all of you go out and you know, increase vegan awareness, encourage everyone to educate others about veganism. That's all I have. I can take some questions or comments. Yes.
So, for example, I have a bunch of family members who are all big hunters, and they're definitely in the pre-contemplation stage. Is there anything that you can do to, you know, nudge them into the contemplation stage, or are some people just going to stay in that stage, in the pre-contemplation stage forever, no matter what you do?
What have you tried?
Everything that we discussed was the wrong thing to do. So I guess I've tried talking. Of course, when I first went vegan, it was the hardcore, like, oh, murder, rape, you know.
Right.
And then I just tried sitting down with them. They're just, you're in basically a cult. You don't know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Right.
God put animals on earth for us to eat, and
Right.
I've tried everything.
Right.
So, is there anything that you can do to nudge people like that into?
Well, let me put that one in the group to see what other people
Okay.
think. Any suggestions people have?
I just think they're a lost cause, because I deal with the same thing. Like my in-laws are just hunters, and they just go off and do everything just they like to.
Right.
They don't even eat it, they don't do anything, they just kill them and let them go.
Right.
So I just consider they're a lost cause. Like I feed some of them vegan food without informing them that it's vegan food, just to see if they'll eat it, if they know a difference.
Right.
But trying to talk to them, they just shut their doors, and I'm very nice about it. I'm not aggressive in any way, and they just completely go glaze over eyes and they don't even listen.
Right.
What about, so it kind of depends on how close the person might be to you, but say it's your parents or it's your siblings or something like that. Maybe they don't really think they care about it, but they care about you. And so maybe you can say, this is something that's really, really important to me. I want you to at least understand where I'm coming from. Would you be willing to like read this book, whatever that might be, or watch this documentary? Maybe not Earthlings, maybe, but you know, maybe Conspiracy or something, like just some things that they can kind of understand where you're coming from. I don't know.
Have you tried that?
I've told them to watch Conspiracy, and they're just like, this is all bullshit. Lies.
I also like the idea of talking about your own experience, because it puts people less on the defensive when you're saying why you did it. You know, not necessarily saying like why they need to stop, but this is for me why I did it. You know, kind of like in psychology where we make I statements. You say, I feel a certain way. The other person is a lot less defensive when you say like, you do this or you make me feel this way. So that's one approach. But I also do, you know, agree that there will be cases where you will have said everything you could possibly said, and you know, and done everything you could do, and you just have to let it go. Yeah, I've had to do that with some of my own family members, like my mother, who's a Buddhist, you know, who you would think would be open to the message, you know, and eventually where I had to leave it with, and she kind of agrees with veganism. She understands like why I do it, but yet she still continues to eat animals. And I think there's other, you know, there's a lot of stuff. For a lot of people it's complicated. I think for her it's complicated, her relationship with food in general and that sort of stuff. But at some level, I just had to kind of give her like the world peace diet and hope she reads it someday. You know? And that's like, you know, she knows how I feel, and it comes up every once in a while. But I feel like I've kind of said and did everything I can do, and I'm kind of at a loss, kind of like how you feel with the hunter. For me, it's really frustrating because she's Buddhist, and she should be open. Sarah, you're going to say something?
Sometimes I feel like people that just have a wall there, and I have some cases like that in my family as well. One thing I think personally that I like to do is to approach it, try and get to them at the heart level, way past any sort of logic. And one of the ways I think is really effective to do that is to share specific sanctuary rescue stories, so they connect with one being. There's a lot of those on YouTube. The different sanctuaries will sometimes put the stories on, and then there's also sanctuaries that will feature individual stories. And then if you have the ability to actually take them, like for your birthday or something, ask them to go to a sanctuary trip if there's one nearby, and have them get to know individuals. And maybe you don't commit to going vegan then, but maybe you'll make something click that these are actual animals at the other end of this. This isn't just something you can keep writing off.
I like that idea of going to sanctuary. I try to do that kind of stuff with my family too. And I also make it clear that I'm not going to go to events where people are eating animals, because I think just kind of letting other people know that this is something really serious for you, this is kind of your moral conviction, conveys that to other people, that it's not just kind of a diet, it's really serious and really upsetting to you. Yes?
Well, this might go against one of your main messages, but I do feel like comparative ethics, relative ethics, getting people to just kind of think, no matter, that there aren't really good right or wrong, there are, but I find that to be helpful for me and for people that just so that the hunter, if you can relate to them on the level of, okay, well, yeah, is it better to do this or better, and then I know that gives people an excuse and a way out sometimes, but I do think globally humans need to start thinking more about ethics in general and not just take hierarchical down, top down ways of looking at things. So I find it's globally good to encourage people to think, just start thinking about, what is, if you have to kill an animal, what's a better way to kill an animal, or under what circumstances should you kill a person or should you kill an animal? When is it right to eat an animal, when is it not? So I actually like that approach, but I know I hear what you're saying too.
Well, it sounds like, with the hunters, it's especially challenging because they may hold a lot of myths, so just to get them to think about ethics at all is a step forward, you're saying.
Yeah, to validate, someone will say, well, if I'm going to eat the animal, then, I don't know. I think that's part of humans' problems is that we've taken a lot of top-down, just this is right, this is wrong, and not really thought about it and questioned it and identified that animals and humans are, and there are a lot of continuums. And I think when people can think in continuums, they can start thinking in ethical situations and try to compare different ethics, and that actually could lead them down the path that says, yeah, why is it okay for me to eat an animal when I don't really need to?
Yeah.
That's a big project, but I think it's a deep project.
I would still kind of go with, we don't have any need to do it. Because if you start taking the little tiny steps, like from a hunter to get to a vegan, that's going to be 100 steps. And I personally think that's our best argument, is that we have no need to. Because I think when you get into all these kind of gray areas and what's the best way to kill an animal, that sort of stuff, I don't think that's not really a strong case. Not compelling. I think the most compelling thing is that we don't have to do it. And that might not work with a hunter, and it may be that nothing works with a hunter. So good luck. Yeah. I will take one more.
When people are really defensive, I personally find it easier to back off and direct my energy elsewhere. Sometimes luckily they will continue to pick on me and they'll try to make fun of what I'm doing, and then that's when I can correct some of the information. With my parents or with my family, I found that they went from the pre-contemplative stage and you're crazy about this into the contemplative stage, sort of without me really pushing. And at the very least, it's easier for your own well-being if someone's really defensive.
I think that's a good one. Yeah, because it is really hard because you love your family and you know them as kind, compassionate people. To see them directly contributing to harm like that is so profoundly disappointing. That And so I have found it too, that the other advocacy I do makes me feel like, okay, I'm gonna help other people go vegan. I'm not gonna be able to, make the change I wanna make here, but I can, live, I can live with myself, from, trying to help other people. So I think the more that we can do to kind of advocate for animals, the more that we won't feel like, oh, like I really need in this one place to make this change, and it's kind of like make or break for your own sense of well-being.
Well, and sometimes families are the hardest. Like, if they hear the exact same things you said from somebody else, and sometimes you planted the seed, but now somebody else, you hear from somebody else.
I heard it on that.
Or especially, yeah, some authority figure, then the rings through and they make those steps that much faster.
So any more questions? We can do one more, and then, yes.
I think this is more of like a group question. This is my first holiday season as a vegan, and I guess I'm looking for advice about how to spend time with my family, because watching other people eat animal products is upsetting sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just
Yeah.
Can you host? Because what I do is I now host all the holidays, because then I'm making food and I'm control of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or you show up after people are done eating just to visit and socialize and eat prior. That's what I do. I just eat before I go and show up a little late after everyone's done eating.
Question for you then, have you ever had people bring, when you said, hey, I'm hosting, I'm making all the food, what do you do if they then bring?
I've had them offer, what can I bring? I'm like, you know what, I'm good. Some fresh fruit.
I think it's okay to tell people this is a vegan house. At this point, none of my family would even think of that. But in the past they have tried to do that, and it became a thing. And another way, there's no right or wrong answer for this. So these are all good suggestions, I think. And another suggestion, another possibility, which is to let them know that you're not going. It's up to you, and there's no right or wrong response for everybody. You have to decide what is okay for you, or what's best for you, what's healthiest for you. I personally have had to tell my family that I can't go to any of these events and sit down with them and watch them eat animals, because it's not good for me and it's not good for our relationship. Because when I see them doing it, it affects how I interact with them. I can't just laugh and have a good time when I witness that. And then they're wondering, well, what's wrong with him? Why did he just leave abruptly? So I know it's not good for me, and so I let them know that. And we've worked around it. I'll see them. Well, one side of my family, they always just do vegan, because they recognize that it's important to me, and that's what they do. The other side of my family, I don't really see them quite as much. Or I see them for short visits, in the morning, when it's not meal time, where we don't have to deal with that. Or, for Thanksgiving, we have it at our house. So it may be kind of a combination between all these suggestions that you're getting that will work for you, but it's individual, and it's whatever works for you. And I'm not even necessarily saying that, you can't just go over there and have the meal with them, or, it's up to you, what you think is best for you. And your advocacy and everything else. There are situations where I may have to compromise. My father is really not well, physically, and if I know that I may never see him again, I will be less likely to say, well, I'm not going to go over to your house if you're eating animals, because I don't want to have any regrets. I didn't see him one more time, that sort of thing. So nobody can say that there's any one right or wrong way to do it. So.
And you can also bring something that you really like, so that you just have one thing that's really good and feeling that you're gonna like.
I did that for years. Where I would bring a dish and we'd eat that. But then I found myself starting to get a little bit resentful, because I'm going through all this effort, I'm carrying all this food to all these different houses with me, and they couldn't just leave the butter out of the green bean. You know what I mean? so I used to do that, and now I'm at the point well, now screw it, I'm not going there.
It could be help maybe if you're whoever's throwing the holiday, you could help them maybe veganize at least some of the side dishes. So if they're not willing to do the whole thing vegan, you could at least have, it's not to have that veganized mashed potatoes or green beans,
Right.
I do think there's an especially difficult part about Thanksgiving, and that is I I do not draw the line in the same place, and I think that's partly because I started being vegetarian and then vegan at a time where it was considered so unusual that I had zero support anywhere, you know. And so I'm quite accustomed to sitting with people who are eating animals, but damn it, I cannot manage when people have been cooking a turkey in the house all day, and it's the whole house, everything there is such a strong smell, and then they rip into that animal at the dining room table. I can tolerate all sorts of stuff, but wow, I cannot handle that.
Yeah.
And that really, I think, is a special issue about probably that for people who do Easter, those giant hams. I think there are some holidays that are just more pungently obnoxious to deal with. And maybe that's a good argument for stopping by afterwards for a piece of vegan pie that you brought with you.
Yeah. It is a great suggestion. I think this is a good time to end because I think they close at 8. If anybody's interested in a book, I'll sign them back there. They're $15, and I take credit cards too. And I brought, so I mentioned I co-own Vegan Publishers, a vegan themed publishing company. So I brought just a handful of some of our other books if folks are interested in those. So thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you.